And what I just send out the, whichever of the three recordings turns out to be the best. Okay, so we go back to the question. Okay, so will there be a recording sent out? There will be. I had a question from Joe Ham about international time of sessions. So Joe sees a lot of clients around the world in different locations, and she wanted to know, could she sort of put instead of it being in local British time, could she put the time of the appointment, sort of appointment by appointment internationally? And the answer is you can't. You can set up as a therapist, depending on your geographical location, you can set up your time zone appropriately so that all your reminders going to clients would then go out at the right time. But Pragmatic Tracker is quite sophisticated, but not so sophisticated that we can cope with a whole pile of therapists all in different time zones with clients all over the place as well. So that was the answer to that. Judith, who's here with us today, had asked about adding couples and family, and I was glad, Judith, to be able to oblige you straight away. So I just want to show that for anyone. Judith does quite a lot of work with couples and families, and she wanted a way of sort of marking that as distinct from just therapy in general, that this was a couple session or a family therapy session. So we added them into the list of session types, so they're available in there. There's something else in here as well I want to draw your attention to, which is review no attend, because I had a question from somebody saying sometimes I've got a communication with a client, like a text message or an email exchange or something like that in between sessions, and I want to sort of capture it as something that happened, but it's not a session as such. So actually, this has been here a while, and probably one of these things I should have explained. If you choose review no attend and you deselect client facing, what happens is it's now a session where you've in effect, it's like a note-taking session where you can write some notes in here and save that, but it's not like a treatment session that you've done with the client. So that's just a neat way of doing that, because sometimes you might want to remember that you'd had this exchange about whatever it might be. It's also a way, by the way, which came up in discussion about PTSD resolution work yesterday. It's also a way, if you have a client who drops out of treatment, they've disappeared, you've contacted them and they're not coming back or whatever like that, and you want to just write a note to yourself that I tried to contact or whatever like that. So you might have, assessment, therapy, client review no attend, client dropped out, disappeared. It's just a way of you capturing a bit of information, because of course we forget, and then a year later you go back and think whatever did happen to that person. So it's just a way of you sort of capturing that as well. If there's something you've a burn, like I can't see you all at the minute, but if you've a burning issue about anything, just shout out. It's absolutely fine. But I'll get through these and then I'll give you all time to come back to me on them anyway. So that's got as far as there. Can interventions have a summary text box? So somebody asked, could they be one place they went to just see all of the interventions they did at any session with the client? Well, you sort of have that through the summary box anyway. So if you click on the summary tab, you see that's one page, it's next to the chart. You click on the summary tab, it shows you all of the sessions, shows you all of the information and all of the interventions, and you can easily see pretty much on one page everything you've done anyway. So I hope that meets that requirement. The next one, this takes a little bit of time. So this is something that's cropped up now. Some of you may have heard me speaking about this before. I get asked from time to time, should I use the ENA or should I use the PRN 14 with clients? So by way of explanation, the emotional needs audit dates way back to the early 2000s. And basically, Joe and Ivan had this idea of, well, could we take the sort of emotional temperature of the population at large? So they created the emotional needs audit, matching up with their idea of what human givens needs are, etc. And they created an emotional needs survey website so that any member of the population anywhere could go on and sort of assess how well they're getting their needs met or not in life. And it was just a way of them testing the water to see, well, in the country at large, like where do people sort of say they are at. Now, of course, therapists exposed to the emotional needs audit felt, well, this would be valuable with my clients as well. And the emotional needs audit is a very useful way of assessing at the beginning of treatment how people are doing, what needs are getting met, what identifying which ones aren't getting met, etc. The challenge with the emotional needs audit as a measurement instrument across a short course of treatment is that it's simply not very good. It's not sensitive enough to change. So some of the needs, for example, that may not be getting met, maybe connecting up with the wider community or whatever like that, in a shortish course of treatment, a person may not see a significant enough shift taking place in that. They may need more time to go by. So aware of this, probably now 13 years ago, 14 years ago, I started working on the idea of developing an instrument that would fit hand in glove with the human givens approach, but would be more sensitive to change across the course of treatment. And that eventually led to, in fact, the PRN 15, which then led to the PRN 14, because one item of the 15 items was so closely aligned with other items, it was redundant. And that's how we ended up with the PRN 14. Now, what I'm very pleased to say is the PRN 14 has been in widespread use by many of you guys for many years. And it's been in use certainly in PTSD resolution for many years as well. And we now have thousands of data points of sort of measurement at the beginning and end of treatment in parallel with other measures. And what we can see, and I will, if I get time to show you from the PTSD resolution data, you can see how the magnitude of change as measured through the PRN 14 is really similar to the magnitude of change as measured through something like, for example, Core 10, PHQ-9, GAD-7, etc. And the other thing is that as a measure, it loads it loads on one construct. So in other words, I don't even know what the name for that construct is, because human givens is not the appropriate thing, really. It's something about healthy functioning, for example, is about as close as I can get to it. So the PRN 14 is a measure of healthy functioning. And all of the items of those 14 items load onto that concept of healthy functioning. So it's a long-winded answer. I'm sorry about that, but it took a bit of explanation. And by all means, feel free to use the ENA if you're happy with that. I would suggest the ENA is more valuable as an initial assessment tool to see where people are. But the PRN 14 is more useful if across your course of treatment, you're looking to demonstrate change on those needs and on healthy functioning, etc. So, you may have some comment about that. I'll come to that in a sec. Oh, maybe I'll just check back in with you at this point. There's a bit of a halfway through the questions. Just check if there's anyone. Oh, Judith, you've got your hand up. Just unmute yourself, Judith.
I was going to say off camera because I'm eating. I use Pragmatic Tracker for supervision, so ENA with my supervisees, and then the PRN 14 with clients.
Oh, fine.
So yeah, that's how I use both. Because we've obviously with supervisees as therapists, we don't need to kind of measure, but it's useful for a check-in.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else want to jump in at any point here? Lise? No? Yes? Yeah, just unmute yourself. Yeah.
This is a practical question. I haven't used this. I've just finished my part 3 this week.
Oh,
but, I was trying to hook into my account, and I think I haven't used it really. So I'm right website address, and I was wondering if you could put that in, or will I need to re-up? into the system?
Lise, would you ever just email me after the meeting and just remind
Okay.
me? And
I just
go
thought I
look
could
up.
look at it as you were talking, but
Yeah, I'm a bloke. I can only concentrate on one thing at a time. So message me afterwards, and if you don't mind. Yeah, I'll go to the wrong screen and get all confused or whatever, you know. So yeah, for sure, just message me afterwards. Okay, are we okay? Any other points? We're all right to move on. Okay, great. So let me go back to my questions again. I've got a very slow internet. I'm in North Wales and the internet's very slow, so it just takes a while for it to load up. Okay, so number 6, measure choice more generally. So this came up, people asking me like, what measures should I use, etc., etc. So I just wanted to make the point here. We've had Pragmatic Tracker going for donkey's years, and before that, Cornet and stuff like that. So, there are hundreds of human givens therapists that are, I would describe as sophisticated users of measures and feedback, sophisticated outcome-informed practitioners. And it's always been my wish to encourage people right from the beginning of their training to be interested in their outcomes, because there's process of what you do in therapy, but then there's the outcome of what actually is happening. And having valid instruments as a way of measuring change in treatment is very, very helpful, because you can identify at the beginning what areas are problematic for the client. It helps your information gathering. And then, of course, as you're progressing through treatment, you can identify what stuff is improving and what stuff isn't improving, etc. So I think it's great to have, basically a lot of the human givens therapists work in this way, and that's fantastic. However, I would never have wanted to sort of straitjacket people into saying, oh, you must use measure 1, 2, and 3, because people work in all sorts of different situations. Judith, for example, is working with couples and families. She may be choosing to use some children's measures with the kids, or whatever. Somebody else might be doing an awful lot of trauma work and they want to use trauma-based measures. So I felt it was important to have a sort of a menu of choice. And that's largely what's happened. Now, typically, a lot of therapists settle down with maybe typically core 10 at every session, or maybe GAD-7 and PHQ-9, and that's great. A few years ago, I did point out that there is, if you're trying to harness your data, for example, to do some marketing, maybe with local GP groups or whatever, that GAD-7 and PHQ-9 are very valuable to have, because GPs understand GAD-7 and PHQ-9, because they're part of the IAPT program, Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. The other advantage of human givens therapists measuring through those IAPT measures is it allows us to make some comparison with published IAPT data as well. However, as I say, I wouldn't want to be straitjacketing people into doing anything. But it's different if you're doing a research project. So if you're, for example, Project 100 with PTSD resolution, before the project started, we published the protocol to say, right, our research questions are A, B, C, and D. We're using measures 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in order to assess this. This is what we're sort of anticipating we might find, etc., etc. So you're stating your intent before you do it, if you like. Now, I was saying yesterday that for years, I've had this sort of hallucination that peer groups all around the country, I don't know how many there are, but let's say there's 20 peer groups. Well, Bill Andrews' fantasy would be that each peer group would decide on a small research project. Doesn't have to be complex, it could be very simple, and it could be something conducted even over 3 months or 6 months, possibly even involving only one therapist. But as you'll see in a minute, there's a new sort of opportunity through the way NICE is assessing evidence to present evidence in this way. Now, you can imagine if 20 peer groups had 20 little research projects, which led to 20 papers in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, that would be sensational. Now, if one was designing a project, you would write your protocol, you'd say, this is what we're going to do. And then, of course, you do need to adhere to those measures. So you get consistent reporting through that project for whatever length of time it's going on for. So that's the sort of difference between a bespoke research project and day-to-day use of measures. So again, on B there about what's optional and what's necessary. Well, when you're doing a research project, it's all sort of necessary, but of course, circumstances will alter cases. So when you have clients who are too emotionally upset, or for one reason or another just can't, do the measures, you have to accept that. Obviously, you can't sort of straight, ram it down their necks. But that's the idea there. Okay, so number 7, PCL5. Not all of you might have access to PCL5, and if you want it, just let me know. I don't think I have it done by default for everybody, but the PCL5 is a 20-item questionnaire for measuring trauma. So for donkey's years, we used to use the impact of event scale. The impact of event scale was designed and developed before PTSD was even invented. It's a Horowitz scale going back to the 70s. And PTSD didn't come into existence until the 80s. In fact, obviously, there were a lot of people who were traumatized before then, but as a definition in the DSM-5, it didn't come into existence until the 80s. The PCL-5 then is a measure that matches with the DSM-5 criteria, which is the sort of psychiatric Bible of mental disorders. But most importantly, it's used by IAPT as well. So again, it's a measure that is in more widespread use today. And so I've been encouraging human givens practitioners generally to think of using PCL5 now instead of the impact of event scale with their clients. And the question came up because this person said, well, the PCL5 asks about over the last month, but supposing you've maybe done some de-traumatization work or rewind or whatever at session 2, and maybe there's a change between session 2 and 3, but the PCL5 is asking about the last month before they even began therapy, well, it'll be out of kilter. It's a very good question. And the answer is that you would not use the PCL5 as a session by session tool. What you do is you use it at the beginning of treatment and at the end of treatment. And of course, normally speaking, a month would have sort of gone by, or more would have gone by. And so that's the point about that. It does beg the question, however, GAD7 and PHQ-9 do ask about over the last 2 weeks, and Core 10 asks about over the last week. So, if you're seeing a client weekly, you might say, well, you've got the same sort of issue there. Well, GAD7 and PHQ-9 are the IAPT measures, the Improving Access to Psychological Therapies measures. They are the benchmark measures that are used for measuring change in IAPT, and so they're very valuable for us to have data on. And so we basically have to just get over that. We can't change, you can't change the instrument. You can't change it to over the last week or whatever like that, because it invalidates the instrument. Okay, next one. I have a question about effect size. So this person wanted to understand what actually is effect size. So first of all, the place you see effect size on your own data is if you, for example, choose closed clients, and so your closed list comes up, and then you click on scatter chart, what you'll get is a scatter chart showing you dots representing when a measure was administered at first point and the last available point, and that creates an intersection on the chart. All of the dots to the right of that diagonal line are clients who've improved. All dots to the left of that line are clients who've deteriorated in treatment. So it's a very quick way of getting a good pictorial representation of your client group. But you'll also notice effect size calculations over on the left-hand side of that screen. Now, these will change depending on your chart selection on the right-hand side. And maybe I should try, just let me see if I can get somewhere to actually show you this. Okay, So if I go closed cases, 7,923 closed cases, by the way, in the Pragmatic Tracker database for PTSD resolution. Right. Sorry, it's just taking a second to load up. Right, let's take core 10. Okay, right, let's show this with you now. Okay, so this is the entire database for human givens. And so you can see out of all of the clients in there, there's like 7,000 clients have been measured with something, but 900 of them were measured with core 10. You can see over here on chart control, if I just choose one measure, the y-axis will change to the correct axis for that measure, 0 to 40, and it tells me the number. And here's the effect size. Now there's 4 different sorts of effect sizes, and they're all just slight variants in the way they're calculated. But the concept of an effect size is that regardless of the instrument that you're using, it's standardizing it. So it's sort of saying, well, you know, we won't worry about, is it core 10, is it GAD7 or whatever like that. We'll do a calculation that demonstrates the magnitude of change. So take core 10 for an example. Somebody who starts off treatment at a score of 20, and by the end of treatment, they get to 17. There's been a very small effect. They have improved, but it's just a small bit. On the other hand, take somebody who starts at 20 and they finish at 4, there's been a huge effect. And so you want a way of sort of demonstrating overall on these 907 cases, was the average effect large or small? And as you can see, the number here is over 1 no matter which way you calculate it, and 3 of them are exactly the same. Now, a small effect would be 0 to something like 0.3. A medium effect would be 0.4 to 0.6, and a large effect would be 0.8 and up. So what this is showing is that on these 900 closed cases, there's a large effect of treatment. Now, each one of you can go into your own scatter chart, just like I've done here for everybody, and you'll have, what it'll show you is any measures you've used will be over on this right-hand side here, and you can choose more than one measure at a time, but watch what happens to the y-axis if I choose more than one measure. It'll just take a second to update. There, it's done it now. Now you've got dots representing both measures, and you can see the y-axis has changed to 100. That's because if you're using 2 different tools, the range is obviously different. So core 10 goes 0 to 40, PHQ-9 goes 0 to 27. You can't put them unless you standardize the measurement. So we recalculate them into between 0 and 100 and display them on the same screen. But then if I deselect core 10, it now goes to the PHQ-9, and you can see, again, a very large effect of treatment, greater than 0.8. So this gives you an opportunity to get a sense of your own effect size on your client group. You can go in and it will show you all of your data, obviously, all of your closed cases or all of your open cases. You would expect the effect size to be lower on your open cases because there are people who are still in treatment, and then you close them out when you're finished treatment. So that's what effect size is about. I hope that helps to explain it. And now, was there something else? Usage report, yes. So let me go to where I could show you this. This has come up in relation to the SCOPED stuff that Human Givens is involved in. And there we go. Right. So, okay, I can go back to show that now. So you'll notice on your client list page, your main sort of dashboard page. Over on the right-hand side, you've got that, left-hand side, you've got that scatter chart button, and next to it, you've got the report button. If you click on the report button, you'll get access to a bunch of reports. Most of them will probably not be of very much interest to you. But the one that might be of interest to you is this, the usage report. So the usage report, I've just had it rebuilt recently. It used to be really for managers in organizations to be able to get a sense of the level of activity going on in their organization. But I've had it recalibrated so that you as each individual can get your own usage report just on your own data. And a lot of the headings in the columns will not be of great interest to you. It's stuff like numbers of referrals. They might be of interest to you. But by the way, when you download the report, you download it as what's called a CSV file, which is just an Excel file. It opens in Excel. And when you open it up, it will tell you, for example, the numbers of sessions, the numbers of sessions with data, the numbers of failed to attend sessions, all that sort of information. And from that, then, obviously, you can calculate your number of hours, because this is what's coming up that the therapists need to be able to report on their numbers of hours of therapy that they've done. So you'll be able to find out from the beginning of whenever you use Pragmatic Tracker, your usage, in effect. If there's anything about that you struggle to understand, I think it's pretty self-evident, to be honest. Just widen the labels out at the top so you can see them a bit better. But you should find that hopefully quite interesting. So I'll just come back to you now. At this point, we're about halfway to see if there's any questions or comments arising from anything there, or if you have any additional questions you want me to try to answer or to answer. Any hands up? No. Oh,
Bill, hi, Bill. If you're looking to start a new project, a research project, that doesn't include any of the clients that you've seen, so you've already got recorded. Is there a way to identify that, to tag that as a new specific piece of work that could be separate from the other clients you have?
Yes, that's a great question, and yes, there is. So, if for example, in your peer group, you got together with a bunch of, half a dozen therapists and said, look, we'd like to run a project. What I would do is create a team for team Paul Hanley's project, and then you'd get a different login, and you'd log in, and that would be like a completely separate thing altogether, So if there were, let's say there was half a dozen therapists cooperating in that, you'd have a name for the project, and then I would create individual logins for those users, and that would isolate the data in that way,
So by creating the same, doing that would be dropping you an email with the name of the team, and
exactly.
You would give us, yeah.
Yeah, you'd also want to tell me what measures you wanted available to that group of users as well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you.
Great question, actually. Very Kathy.
Yeah, there's a part that sort of when you've finished with the client, the follow-up, and I know that's done at this is PTSD, by the way.
Right, yeah.
Someone that works there does the follow-up.
Yeah.
One of my clients, I'd finished with him over a year ago.
Yeah.
He rang me and said, I wanted to make a comment, and there's I'm not sure which of the forms they fill in, but he said there was nowhere where he could actually make a comment, and he said it was a bit biased, that he hadn't done as well as he felt he had, if you see what I mean.
Oh, I see. That
he just wanted to write a comment saying, well, actually,
that's very interesting, Kathy. I'm in charge of constructing all of that, so that's very interesting feedback, and I didn't think of that. That would be real easy for us to do. We can just add in, like, have you any other comment, just as a one-item measure, if you like. That's just free text box to give people that opportunity. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Just to make it a bit more personal for them.
Yeah. I mean, follow-up is always challenging anyway. And it's great when people do follow up. But Yeah, like so what we do is we use the same suite of measures that are used at the beginning and end of treatment, you know, to try to get some sort of consistency. Yeah, great point, Kathy.
Yeah, I had looked at, looked up the follow-up and just for
Would you
my
ever
own
do me a
interest.
favor and after the meeting, could you ever email me and just remind me about that? Because it'll go out of my head, you know. But if I've got an
Okay,
email, it'll jog my memory. Andre,
sure.
thanks, Kathy.
Hiya. Can you hear me? Yeah, I
Yes,
was
yeah.
just wondering, because I've just finished with a client, his request was like, could I see you again in about 2 months' time?
Yeah.
See how I'm getting on. I've got it with quite a few other clients, not the P100 ones, where people are sort of coming back and almost having a top up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a possibility within the PTSD one.
You mean within the PTSD protocol and all that? Can they come
Yeah.
back in 2 months' time? I mean,
Hmm.
I know the facility is there to request additional sessions, so you get 6 sessions automatically.
Yeah.
But if you need more sessions, as long as you can make a case for it, you write to Malcolm, I think, is the clinical director, no, Malcolm
Yeah.
Hanson, and you just say, look, I think it would be useful in this case to have one more session, and that would be fine. I'm sure, you know, it wouldn't be.
Well, I actually just said to the client, if you want that, do get in contact with PTSD Resolution just for running it over a bit.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, about 20% of the clients in PTSD resolution are what I call episode 2 or second or third episode
Right.
clients anyway,
Okay.
you know? So there is that facility. Quite a lot of people do come back, not because, and it's interesting when they're asked, they, if they're asked, have you had treatment before? Yes. With who? PTSD resolution. Was it helpful? Yes. But I'm coming back, coming back because it was helpful and I want some more of it, you know?
Yeah.
So that's quite good as well, you know? Yeah, great. Kathy,
Yeah, I have several that have come back,
yes.
Even a year later.
Yeah, that's right, Chad.
And you just sort of say they've got to go through, well, now Malcolm.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Just like you said, give some sort of plan of what you intend to do with the extra.
Yeah, exactly.
They very, very rarely say no, sorry.
No, exactly. No,
Rarely.
that's not the style. That's not the style. Great. Okay. Anyone else got anything? You're all happy with all the answers to those questions? It all makes sense. Good. Okay. So what I'll do, if there's no more things, is I'll jump over to and I'll see if we can deal with as much of this as we've got time for. So basically, this is so Project 100. For those of you who don't know, is a project that we created back in the end of 21. The idea being behind it that, okay, PTSD resolution, like many practitioners in HGI, been routinely collecting data for many years, mostly in the form of Core 10 and the impact of event scale. But we thought, right, let's do a new project where it's really tight and we use all of the tools that are used by IAPT, and we do even more than that as well. And we're very sort of crisp around the edges about how we go about the whole thing. And we've got a good tight protocol, good follow-up procedure, and all the rest of it. So that came into existence in 1st of April 2022. Obviously, by now, we've got a considerable amount of data. So at the PTSD Resolution Conference, I reported on the sort of first 12 months data. By then, there was 15 months data, in fact. And I also talked about what I want to tell you about, which is real world evidence framework by NICE guidelines. So I'm just going to go to this, and then I won't get through everything here, I don't think, but we'll get through as much as we can. Let me just get to there. Okay, you can see that now, yeah? Yeah. Okay, so November. So, a pet subject of mine for 15 years has been the fact that NICE guidelines. So NICE, the National Institute for Healthcare Excellence, a government-created body back in the 90s. The idea being which they would survey, investigate all of the evidence for any type of treatments, medical, pharmaceutical, psychological, and come up with a policy, a sort of guidelines about, you know, what should one do when a client presents in such and such a way. Now, the hierarchy of evidence, in other words, what's the top of the tree for NICE guidelines, has always been the randomized controlled trial. Now, a randomized controlled trial is where you compare two groups that are randomly allocated. So you have a bunch of people, they're randomly allocated into one or other of these two groups, and there's no difference between these two groups except for one thing, whatever it is you're investigating. So, for example, if it's a drug, the doctor administering the drug does not know whether they're giving the drug or not. The client receiving the drug does not know whether they're receiving the drug or not. So everyone is blind. The client's blind to it, the treating practitioner is blind to it, and the active ingredient is altered by whoever's running the researchers, whoever's running the research project, but the pill looks identical. So that's a way of discovering, is there an effect of the active ingredient as opposed to placebo, if you like. And this idea of randomization and controlled studies was incorporated into the American Psychological Association back in the late 90s because they wanted to compete with these drugs that were now out on the market for anxiety and depression, etc. And so it sort of found its way into the thinking, if you like, and very much became part of the NICE guidelines as well. Now, it makes sense, of course, in lots of things in medicine, pharmaceutical industry, and drugs and all the rest of it. But when you try to apply it to the field of counseling and psychotherapy, it's not easy to do, because if you think about it for 2 minutes, how can you be blind to what you're doing? If you're delivering a treatment, you know, if you're delivering a sham treatment, a pretend treatment, you're not doing what you would expect to be doing anyway. If you're doing the proper treatment, well, you know you're delivering the proper treatment. So the idea of being blind to it is impossible. And as a result of that, most of the studies that are included in NICE guidelines are for the comparison, random allocation of clients into two groups. One group is waitlist control. So they just don't start treatment at the same time as the treatment group. Treatment group are treated, the waitlist control are eventually treated, but of course they're measured as they go throughout that wait time period while the other lot are being treated, in the hope that you'll see a difference then between the two. Now, again, if you think about that for 2 minutes, I mean, quite honestly, if you're seeing a therapist, regardless of what the therapist is doing, if they're empathic, if they've got good rapport skills, all those general skills you'd expect to find in any model of therapy, you'd probably expect to see an effective treatment anyway. The thing is, the randomized controlled trial does not accurately reflect everyday practice. Well, 23rd of June 2022, after all this time, I came across the real world evidence framework. And you can all find this. You just Google NICE guidelines, real world evidence framework, and you'll come to it. And I was absolutely thrilled to find this. That's the link there to the overview, but I mean, it's easy to find. And what they've said here is that, well, why they decided to create this framework is, why might RCTs be unavailable? Randomization is considered unethical or unfeasible. Technical challenges make randomization impractical. Funding is not available for a trial. These were all sound reasons. And so they came up with this idea, well, okay, if you can't do it, we still would like you to do this randomized controlled trial, but if you can't do that, what could you do as an alternative? And then they provide these guidelines about a framework under which to conduct this real world evidence study. And there's three legs to the stool, if you like. Planning. So in other words, you plan in advance of your study. you publish publicly somewhere your intention of what you're going to do to investigate, how you're going to investigate it, where the clients will come from, etc., etc., etc. Then you come to the second leg of the stool, conduct, and this describes in detail all of the aspects, all of the boxes you need to tick, if you like, so that your study fits this real-world evidence framework. And finally, reporting. So in other words, it's like a guidebook of how to conduct a real-world evidence study. Now, what I've been amazed at is, to my knowledge, the field of counseling and psychotherapy generally is not jumping up and down with excitement about this, because I certainly am, because it's exactly the sort of thing I've been praying and wishing for the last 15 years. And finally, NICE has shifted to at least begin the concept of accepting real-world evidence. The study we conducted back at the end of 2006-07 in Luton, a GP practice, the first ever study in human givens, really, in an organized sort of controlled way that led to a published paper, was in effect a real world evidence study. So we're well familiar with this territory over the years. The difference here now is you've got, if you like, a handbook to tell you exactly all the things that you need to do. And again, this goes back to my hallucination about, wouldn't it be incredible if people in peer groups sort of cottoned onto this and sort of said, hey, we can actually do something. We can invent, it could be something real simple, but you know, anything would be great. And so I'm very excited about this as something that's offering a real opportunity here. And I'm just making the point here that RCT studies, they might have high what's called internal validity. In other words, meaning, yes, the two groups are identical, except for the active ingredient and all that. But it's too remote from what real world practice is all about. You guys will all know, and in fact, at the PTSD Resolution Conference, it was a great illustration of this. 4 therapists, all working under the organizing umbrella of the organizing ideas of human givens, all working in really quite different ways, different styles, all sorts. And that really illustrated to me exactly what this is all about, because this way you're allowing people to do what they do. You're not sort of trying to squeeze them into a like square peg in a round hole type of thing. So that's very important. Reducing a study design to focus on just one experimental intervention. You know, we have a list of 27. There were people yesterday saying, actually, I think there's a few more need to go on that list about what people might do. So, you know, people do all sorts of different things. And the last point I made here is that the wide range of clients seen in the charity PTSD resolution, with from relationship issues, drug and alcohol, social anxiety, anger, complex PTSD, they don't lend themselves to the narrow focus, because in an RCT, you've got to have exclusion criteria to say, no, we won't see anyone who's got a drink problem. We won't see anyone who's taking any sort of recreational medication, recreational drugs, etc., etc. And so you're excluding people that would normally be included. There's also the point about ethical issues around delaying. So, you know, somebody has the courage to make the phone call to PTSD resolution. They might have taken years to get to that point. And the last thing you want to do is to say to them, well, you're actually participating in a research project and your treatment's going to be delayed in onset for 12 weeks. I mean, that would not go down very well, obviously. And again, the cost of running RCTs is in the hundreds of thousands typically, and the charity would far prefer to spend its money on treating clients. So this real-world evidence framework provides an achievable alternative. It's highly applicable. These are Bill Andrews' words in the fields of counseling and psychotherapy, where interventions cannot be blinded, can be achieved at lower cost, and can be reported on. I've already reported on the first 12 months data. Now, it's not a published study yet. We're working towards that, but at least the information is available quickly as a result of the study conducted. So that's the sort of background. And How are we doing? 10 minutes. Project 100. I think what we'll do here is we'll just pick out some highlights. Most of you probably know about the study, but I'm just going to jump to this slide here, just so we don't run out of time. In Project 100, we use 5 different outcome measures: GAD7, PHQ-9, PCL5, Core10, and PRN14. But on this slide, it's showing you the PRN14 is not known to IAPT, but all of these other measures are. So these are measures that one can find data on, particularly GAD7 and PHQ-9. And I'll just go down through one here so you understand what this is about. So 189 is the number of clients who filled in a first GAD7 at their first appointment with the therapist. 180 is, and the included N is 180 because of those 189, 180 of them certainly pitched up for at least one more appointment. So they filled in a second GAD7. Initial cases, 161 of those 189 were scoring at 8 or higher. So a case in IAPT terminology, you're a case if on either or both of GAD7 and PHQ-9 you score at or above the cutoff for the measure. So GAD7 goes from 0 to 21. The most anxious you could be would be a score of 21. The least is 0. At a score of 8 or higher, you're deemed to be suffering with some degree of anxiety. The purpose of treatment then would be so you'd hopefully end up with a score below 8. So you're a case if you're at 8 or above. And recovered cases means that on your last available GAD7, that you're scoring below that cutoff. And as you can see here, that's 56% of the clients that were above the cutoff are now below the cutoff at the end of treatment. Reliable recovery, this just means that you not alone have you ended up scoring below the cutoff, but the amount of improvement was according to the reliable change index of the measure. So GAD7, you need to improve by 4 points or more, PHQ-9, 6 points or more, PCL5, 10 points or more, Core10, 6 points or more. So they're all different, but it's sort of saying, yes, I came in at 15, now I'm 5, I've moved by 10 points, that's higher than 4, and I've ended up with a score below the cutoff. So these are just standardized ways of that they report. And what we wanted to do was report in exactly the same way as IAPT. And so looking across, I'll just bring your attention to the really important points. In every single measure, you can see that the magnitude of change, the effect size, is greater than 1. So in other words, whether you measure these clients through the lens of GAD7, anxiety, depression, trauma, or general distress, you're seeing considerable shift in the treatment of these clients. So in other words, extremely good results. And the same when it comes to reliable improvement and recovery. Now, IAPT actually, they do a combination of GAD7 and PHQ-9 for their recovery rates that they publish. And this is showing it, this combination of GAD7 and PHQ-9, as in our case being 48%. The target for IAPT is 50%. Now, I just want to say about the PRN14, we have to date not yet got a published paper about the PRN14 in spite of my best efforts. I'm much better at yakking and encouraging people to measure change and training people on how to do this than I am at academic writing. And much and all as I've tried, I've been so far unsuccessful in getting a paper published. But in this investigation, independent investigation from Nottingham Trent University, what we've been able to show with the PRN14 is that it too measures change. The effect size is greater than 1. And also the fact the questions all load onto this one factor. Let's call it healthy functioning, for example. So it's a big step towards validating the instrument. But again, we still need to get something published about this. But the take-home message is that there's just one underlying variable, whether you call it effective living, healthy functioning, whatever. The effect size, as you can see, is greater than 1. This goes back to my point. If these clients were measured with the ENA, the effect size might have been 0.6 or less. So it would be unfair to reflect that for the clients. I just showed this slide as one example of a client in PTSD resolution. And what's interesting here is we've got a course of treatment spanning from July through to September. So all the connected dot points are the 3 instruments that are used at every single session. And the ones with the dotted lines are used at beginning and end. But what you notice here is all of these measures swim along together. So they may not be perfectly matched. If they were perfectly matched, they would have a correlation of 1, but that would mean that they're telling you the same thing. So the advantage of having instruments like the difference between GAD7, PHQ-9, Core10 is that they're all giving you slightly different information, but at the same time, they're measuring change in a similar way across the course of treatment. And then the nice thing on this particular example, and of course I would pick out a really good example, at the first review point, the first follow-up at 3 months after the end of treatment here, you can see everything is holding up very well. And in fact, that measure, which is the PRN14, is improved, in fact, even. And then at 6 months, they're all holding up extremely well. And at 12 months, there's a slight deterioration. Now, if you go through a course of treatment with a therapist and you're seeing them every week or every couple of weeks over the space of 3 months, you build up a strong relationship with them, you feel safe and comfortable with them, you can talk about anything with them. You get to the end of treatment, then you got to get on with your life. And of course, things happen. In fact, in a way, Kathy illustrated this by her point made by the client who got in touch with her about how, well, I'm doing better than what the measure sort of suggests that I'm doing. Now, what we found, our researcher found in analyzing the data is, yes, there was a slight deterioration, but it was not significant. There was no statistical significance about it. So in other words, in general, the clients are holding up extremely well. They make very good gains in treatment and they're holding up extremely well. Now I'm going to jump to one more slide because we're almost out of time, which I think makes a very important point. Right, IAP publications, when you go back and you look at their data from 2021-22, they publish a reliable recovery rate of 50%. In Project 100, at that time span I was looking at, it was like 46%. Now, however, notice this. The number of referrals received for British Armed Forces in IAPT in that year was 26,000. But the number of referrals accessing treatment was 19,000. So what happened, the nearly 6,000 people that disappeared? And then finishing treatment, 19,800 start, only 11,000, just over 11,000 finished treatment. And a finished treatment definition in IAPT is attended at least 1 second session. So nearly about 40% of the clients who made it to the start line didn't come back for a second session. But of course, you can only determine improvement rates on this figure here. So it's all very well to say they publish a 50% recovery rate, but if that recovery rate is on a much smaller cohort of clients, then it's not a fair comparison. And this is a gaping hole in IAPT, which is rarely addressed. And I like to address it because our recovery rate, as I said earlier on, was like 48%. So we're almost there. But when you look at the attrition rate of IAP veterans in treatment, you can see the steep fall off. And then if you look at IAP more generally, 1.8 million referrals, only 1.24 million make it into treatment. Only 664,000 of them go more than once. And that means that the numbers who are actually moving to recovery are far lower if you look at it in relation to the numbers referred. Now, I'm sorry, I've had to rush through that very quickly, but the simple take-home message is this. Not only do we have the evidence to say that the treatment conducted through PTSD resolution is in general very effective, it is also very acceptable to the clients. So in other words, the clients aren't turning up for one session and disappearing. They're staying. Almost all of them are staying beyond one session, and 83% of them, in effect, are staying to an agreed planned ending. So this is an enormously important difference. And I would say this is true, although it's something that would have to be tested, I would say it's true more widely in human givens in general. The approach, the human givens approach, is acceptable to people. They like it. It makes sense to them. And so they stay in treatment for longer and come back. Ladies and gentlemen, it's 11:02. I'm very happy to stay as long as you like and answer any questions. I hope that wasn't too fast. I'm sorry, I was trying to get a lot out there in a short space of time, but I'm happy to take any questions before we wind up. Does anyone want to ask me anything?
Well, just a quick one, Bill. It's
Sure.
not in relation to what you've just talked about. That young people's core. One of my clients fed back, and I've just literally looked on Pragmatic Tracker. So on core 10, you've got them all in the same order. So you know it says like not at all most of the time. On young people's one, question 10 is the other way around. And that kind of one of my clients fed that back the other day. You know
Okay.
what I mean?
Again, Judith, could you just email me afterwards?
I'll email it to you. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, sure. Okay. Anything else from anyone, or did that make sense to you? That last bit there. I know it was a bit rushed. I hope it made sense to you. It's just an important take-home message that about the acceptability of the treatment, really. You know.
Sure.
You know, human givens therapists can hold their heads high, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, you all do a great job with your clients. Great. Okay. Well, look, it's been lovely to work with you this morning, and I hope you found this useful. And obviously contact me if you remind me of things, Kathy and Judith. And if there's anything else that crops up, just please get in touch with me, So if there's nothing else, I'll say goodbye and enjoy your Saturday.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you
Bye.
very much. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.